Welcome, everybody, to our latest Sustainability Lunch series. Really appreciate you coming out. We have an awesome turnout today. And I'm particularly excited about today's session. I'm also going to be facilitating the conversation with Nick. And while we're going to talk about insurance as a lever for climate impact, we're also going to be taking a closer look at Nick's career path and sort of this not necessarily non-traditional, but maybe non-linear path into a climate career. And so I think that Nick is going to share some really valuable insight in terms of how to navigate a career path and strategy for yourself. Before we get started, I just have a few quick announcements, a few upcoming events that I want to highlight. First, you've probably heard us blast this from the rooftops, and we're going to continue to do it until the conference itself. But Climate Cap is coming up. We are hosting a 2-day conference where we're going to be hosting about 500 MBAs from across 50 business schools over in the Sandberg Conference Center, and we have a really phenomenal program lined up. It's going to feature a climate tech startup showcase with about 20 MIT founders who are all leading their own ventures. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, of topics, of networking opportunities, and we're going to close everything out with a closing reception at the MIT Museum. So it's going to be really fun. If you want a free ticket to access all of that, please volunteer with us. You can sign up for 1 shift, maximum 2 shifts, but there'll be plenty of time for you to really leverage this program. So if you haven't yet signed up to volunteer with us, please do so by March 6th. After then, we're going to schedule some trainings and actually assign folks to their responsibilities because 500 people is a lot to manage, so we're going to need as much support as possible. Next, quick announcement. We're going to be co-hosting a lunch series on Monday with the MIT Sloan Design Club. They've pulled together a panel featuring New Balance, Fast Company, and Cirque. So if you haven't yet signed up for this panel discussion, be sure to do so with the QR code on the screen or on Sloan Groups. The week after that, we're going to be hosting a lunch series featuring one of our research assistants who just launched a paper with the organization CO. CO is an impact management firm that seeks to solve the pressing challenges at the nexus of poverty and climate change. And they're going to talk about how they transition from being a traditional impact investor to a systemic impact investor. So if this is a space that interests you, be sure to join us for a lunch series on March 10th. QR code's up on the screen and again up on Sloan Groups. And then lastly, on Tuesday, March 17th, and I know that this is SIP, but it's over on main campus, we're co-sponsoring an event with MIT Systems Awareness Lab, Indigenous Spirit at MIT, and MIT Radius. It's a lecture and discussion with internationally renowned scholar Vanessa D. Oliveira Andreatti, a leading voice on decolonial futures, global justice, and the profound transformations that are required in times of social and ecological breakdown. So if you're interested in joining us for any of these events, you can find everything on Sloan Groups. But let me pause actually and plug one more very important event before we talk about Nick's career transition, and that is the MyTech Career Fair. Who here is planning to go to the MyTech Career Fair? Every hand should be up if you haven't yet signed up. A few of the organizers are actually in the room with me today. Any quick announcements to share with students?
Please come. It's next Friday. I think it's at like 1 to 3 in the Student Center. We are collecting a resume book that will be shared with some of our sponsors, and they're already reaching out for like coffee chats and stuff. So please sign up. The link to drop your resume is on the QR code. Yeah, let me know if you have questions. But we have like 20-ish folks across startups, big companies that are looking for interns and full-time. So.
And we'll do some extra communications via the WhatsApp too.
Yeah.
Amazing. Any questions on any of these events before we transition to our conversation? Okay. Amazing. So as I mentioned, while today's session will focus on insights into how insurance can be a powerful lever for climate action, we're also going to spend some time exploring something that's equally as important, which was Nick's journey into a climate career. What makes Nick's story especially relevant for you all is that it wasn't linear. So he began in finance, started a career at Salesforce, but then after moments of self-reflection, sought out mentorship, built relationships, and developed new skills, which ultimately translated into a meaningful climate impact role. Coming off our last lunch series where I talked about sustainability internships, I wanted to just broaden the lens in terms of what we're discussing when it comes to careers in this space. Climate and sustainability careers very rarely follow one singular path. And so often they're network driven, they're values driven, and they're shaped by self-reflection just as much as opportunity. So today you're going to hear just one case study, one example of said career story. And I hope that this can be something that you take personally, but also leverage some of the resources and some of the strategies that Nick suggests. So with that, I'm actually going to transition to now be the facilitator. The student who was supposed to facilitate got an interview today, so we're not upset with him. And Nick, I put together a quick bio to share a little bit about your background before I hand things over. So Nick is the co-founder of Premiums for the Planet, a B-certified corporation working to transform the insurance industry into a force for climate action. By organizing climate-conscious brands like Burton, the Sierra Club, and 1% for the Planet, Premiums for the Planet is unlocking the potential of an often overlooked industry to drive systemic change, bringing mission-driven companies and climate-exposed communities together to reshape the nature of insurance. Nick began his career at Salesforce in sales and business development within financial services. After 8 years, he stepped into a leadership role managing Salesforce's Global Citizen Philanthropy Program, organizing volunteering and giving initiatives across education, economic opportunity, and climate resilience. That experience became a pivotal moment, launching his deeper engagement into climate-focused work. In Seattle, Nick is also partners with the U.S. Chamber of Connection to rebuild trust and belonging in an increasingly transient city, helping reimagine how newcomers are welcomed and how stronger, more inclusive communities are built. Across his work, a consistent theme emerges. Collective action transforms industries and communities. What feels impossible becomes possible when people align around shared purpose. And when he's not working, you'll find him in the mountains, on foot, bike, or skis, soaking in live music, searching for the perfect cappuccino, and spending time with friends and family. Please join me in welcoming Nick.
Right on. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And just quickly, would love to give it up for Jennifer and the MIT team. They're wearing a lot of different hats. They are putting together some amazing programming. And I genuinely can't believe that many of you trudged through a snowstorm to come learn about insurance. But thank you very much. There's a much broader slate of more interesting things that Jennifer laid out. So I really appreciate folks coming through. Jennifer, if it's all right, I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, it's all
and
you.
Get into it. Right on. And just confirming, Jennifer, you can see my screen, right?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Right on. Well, I really just wanted to start with a question. I think, given that you are all in school and really trying to take your education and figure out where to apply it next, it would be really great just from a show of hands to understand in the room who here uniquely knows what you are wired to do. I'd be curious.
We have a couple wishy-washy hands.
A couple wishy-washy hands, yeah. And if you're unsure, you are definitely in good company. I personally did not figure out my career until it made absolutely no sense on paper and have gone through several existential crises along the way. And I think what I wanted to start with was to give you a little bit of a peek under the hood of how I came to be working in climate. As Jennifer mentioned, it certainly is not linear. And I think many of my peers who are working in the impact space broadly would say the same. For myself personally, it started actually working as an undergrad in career services at Bentley University with the great Susan Brennan. If you know her, she was over at Bentley during those times. That led to me going out to Silicon Valley and getting into tech. And then from there, really have had a pretty interesting career ever since. And I think ultimately the main thing to know is that there is no wrong path, and each path that you take is uniquely your own, and ultimately will culminate in something really, really cool. And there's three lessons that I've ultimately learned along that journey. And the first is that in each of the experiences you have, you're ultimately developing really, really specific knowledge. When I was at Bentley, I felt like a fish out of water. I wasn't even really sure why I went there, like I think most 18-year-olds do when they go to college. I was really, really bad at most everything in business. I was not good at accounting. I was really terrible at corporate finance. And so it wasn't until I started working in the career services department, just as an undergrad role, that I really started to learn uniquely who is Nick Gardner and ultimately how to market that to the world. And even though Bentley didn't ultimately put me into a finance role that most kids go to do, whether it's in the big four for accounting or consulting or on Wall Street, I really genuinely learned a lot about how to develop myself as a person and ultimately how to convey that in a compelling way to the world. And so I'm super grateful to Susan and that team for really helping me over 4 years figure out what I didn't want to do and ultimately slingshot that into something that felt a little bit more right. And that was when I first started at Salesforce, where the only way I could get in was through a sales role. I kind of joke that if you don't know like what you want to do in life, just go into sales because you'll learn a lot. It'll beat you up pretty good. And usually you'll come out on the other side, hopefully with a little bit more experience from where you started. And so my way in was through our financial services vertical at Salesforce. And over the first 4 years or 5 years of my career, I did fairly well, but ultimately was not finding much meaning in my work. I was getting really good at helping Salesforce make more money, but I ultimately wasn't finding a lot of purpose in that. And that was around the time that I really started to think about what do I want to do and what experiences in my life do I feel most connected to? And that's always been nature and advocating for the planet. And at that time, Salesforce had a high flying corporate sustainability team led by an amazing MIT alum, Patrick Flynn. And I just thought they were the coolest group in the world. They were doing all of these big initiatives. They were always in the news, leading really as a force for good. And I just saw no way to get to that team. I think, like many of you, I felt I didn't maybe have the right undergrad experience or the right MBA experience. And I had never worked in climate. So I was like, how the heck would I ever get onto this team of total badasses? And that was when I decided to reach out to Patrick and ultimately ask like how can I help and how can I get onto this team. And it was because of my specific knowledge from the career services team at Bentley that I knew how to ultimately package and market myself to Patrick. It was through my specific knowledge of building go to market products for the company that I was able to match that to a need that Salesforce had at that time, which was launching Net Zero Cloud, our carbon accounting platform. And it was a really good way to understand that you don't have to be a climate expert to get into this work. Patrick has a great phrase that's finding your superpower and really taking what you do best now and applying it to a cause you care most about. And so if you're sitting there today feeling really stuck and feeling like I don't have the corporate sustainability chops or I don't have the right experience, I would challenge you to really think about what is your unique path to this point today and how can you take what you do best and apply it to a cause that you care most about. And when you do that, I would also challenge you to practice what I call mirrored reciprocation. The gentleman in the background who you see doing a swan dive off of his house into the pool and is an amazing guy named Peter Barton. Does anyone here happen to know who Peter Barton is? Peter
No.
Barton is a very unknown business titan. He happens to be the dad of one of my best friends, Chris Barton, and I never had the chance to meet Peter. Peter died when Chris was 11 from stomach cancer, and he has an amazing book called Not Fade Away, where I was able to learn a lot about Peter and his philosophy to life. Peter left undergrad and became a ski bum and ultimately ended up in politics and then ended up building Liberty Media, which is now one of the biggest media companies in the world. So when you think about someone who had a very non-linear path, Peter is a really good example of that. And the key lesson that I took away from Peter's journey, that book and his life, is that he practiced mirrored reciprocation. When he was feeling most stuck, he, instead of casting, 1,000 resumes out into the ether, he instead made a list of 100 people that he thought were genuinely doing really, really interesting things in the world. He wrote them handwritten letters with a very simple offer. And that offer was, hey, I'm young, hungry, driven, and I like to believe a very smart person. I'm willing to come work for you for free for 90 days. And at the end of that 90 days, if you feel my work has resulted in a job opportunity, I would like to have it, essentially. And he sent that letter out and got a pretty significant response rate, surprisingly. And over the course of 2 years, went all over the country working for free. And really, the lesson in that is a lot of times you have to lead with service and you have to create value to get value. And in my career, that's played out many times. For the career services department, I was feeling really stuck and asked how I could get involved just to learn more. And Susan brought me in to do exactly that, but it wasn't necessarily a paid thing out of the gates. At Salesforce, I worked for 2 years outside of my day-to-day job on the financial services team to help build the go-to-market product and problem statement for Patrick, and worked a lot of long nights to do that. And then when I ultimately left Salesforce and got introduced to my current co-founder, Brad, I actually worked for him for about a year while taking on other jobs to kind of help float the bills, if you will, before Brad could ultimately pay me to come on as his official co-founder. And so I know that not everyone can do that, and there's certain circumstances that prevent it. But what I would really challenge folks to do is think about how you can be of service to someone first before asking for something, and really taking what you have as a skill and what you do best and saying, hey, where are you stuck right now and how can I help? You'd be surprised that everyone that is in a builder state needs a lot of help. And luckily, all of you are incredibly talented, smart people who can offer a lot to the world. And so I would challenge you to go out there and practice mirrored reciprocation wherever you can. And then lastly, although it is a cliche, I do believe that compound interest is really the eighth wonder of the world, and not in the way that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about it, but really in the sense that small incremental actions over time accumulate. And when you think about your career as climbing a massive mountain and that there needs to be this dream job at the end of some artificial or kind of made up path, it's really important to remember that doing the right things every day over time will lead to good things. There's a reason why athletes, artists, successful business people talk about the idea of being involved in the process and really focusing on what you can control and what are small actions you can take. Those ultimately ladder over time to create something great. I personally have felt very stuck many, many times, but I've always come back to what are the small things I can do today to keep moving forward. And so right now, if you're feeling very stuck in your search, if you're feeling stuck in adding clarity on what you want to do, don't worry about it too much. Just keep controlling what you can control, doing the right things. And just as it has proven in the financial markets, compounding interest over time and being constant can really lead to a lot of amazing things for you and your life. And so the question I would ask you to sit with today, or when you leave this conversation, is really thinking about what has your life uniquely prepared you to do. All of us have followed a different journey, and there's been signs and all along that path that if you're not noticing, you might miss. But if you begin to notice and really identify where are these tracks leading, you'll ultimately discover that is your path. And the coolest part is it's uniquely your own and really only meant for you. And just as much as my own career really has not moved in a straight line by any means, a lot of times when thinking about impact, it's not always the ones that are most obvious, most sexy, or in plain sight that are the ones that matter the most. And what I'm really excited to talk to you today about is how insurance, one of the least sexy, least exciting things you might want to focus on in your day to day, is really one of the most powerful levers we have for climate impact. And so if you're also sitting there and being like, oh, like I have no idea how to go work for Open API or OpenAI or any of these really kind of sexy in the news companies, don't worry. There's a lot of cool opportunities out there that aren't in the limelights. And all you have to do is really continue to search and dig to find them. And often those are the most rewarding ones. So I guess just with another show of hands, how many of you buy insurance? Jennifer, you might have to help me out. Is there a lot of hands going up?
Oh yeah, nearly everyone.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's probably the bane of most of our existence is that process of buying insurance, especially when it comes to health insurance. The second question I would ask is, how many of you know where your insurance dollars go once you pay for them?
Not a single hand. I got a couple wishy-washy.
Right on. And that's okay. And then lastly, how many of you could explain what your insurance premiums are actively financing in the world today?
I see two wishy-washy hands.
Yeah. And this isn't a set of questions meant to shame or embarrass. It's exactly where I was at 5 years ago before I got really involved with Premiums for the Planet. And even though Salesforce had this massive sustainability team and had a ton of budget and a ton of resources, they too often weren't looking at their financial supply chain and the impact of where their money sleeps at night. And this is not limited to insurance. This applies to banking and to 401ks. And the reality is the financial systems that we interact with every day are very passive, but they're also very pervasive. And in a lot of cases, they're opaque and hard to understand, often by design. And that allows a lot of problems to proliferate. And if you live in the United States or have lived in the United States, you understand that capital drives a lot of what we do. And so it's really, really important to understand where your money is going, where it sleeps tonight, and the role it plays in the modern economy. And why does insurance matter? This is a quote that I'll just pause and let everyone read from Gunther Thallinger. Gunther is the CEO of the third largest insurer in the world and has a tremendous voice, not just in the world of insurance, but in the world of climate. And this is a quote that he put out this year that I think really captures the urgency and the critical role that insurance plays, not just in our lives, but also in the future of the modern economy as we experience it today. And I think that last line is really important where, yes, this is about saving the planet, but also what we're talking about today is really about saving the conditions under which markets and ultimately our civilization continues to operate. And it all comes back to insurance. Insurance is a massive force in our lives. Just from a commercial business perspective, we spend about $7 trillion a year on insurance. And there's two huge levers that are important to realize when it comes to insurance. One is investment and one is underwriting. From the investment side of things, that $7 trillion doesn't just sit there. Those are collected as premiums, the dollars you spend on insurance, and they're ultimately invested somewhere. The reason they're invested somewhere is carriers, the one who hold those premiums, need to ultimately make back enough money to pay out claims, but also they have incredibly high profit margins. And it's one of the highest profit margin industries in the entire world. And historically, a significant percentage of those dollars have been invested into low cost, high return opportunities, which historically have taken the form of fossil fuel or carbon intensive industries. And so for a large organization like a Salesforce or a Patagonia, you ultimately might be protesting something on Sunday, but come Monday, when you pay your insurance premium, you might inadvertently be funding the thing that you were protesting on Tuesday. And so there's a massive disconnect in how much we spend on insurance and what those dollars are doing and where they're being invested. At the same time, insurers quite literally decide what to insure and not insure. And so almost everyone raised their hands on saying, hey, like I buy insurance. And the reason for that is you need insurance to operate most things in a modern economy. You need it to drive your car, you need it to get a mortgage for your house, you need it to raise capital for your business, just as much as you need to have insurance to put solar on the top of a rooftop at MIT, or on the flip side, to go drill in the Arctic. And that decision to insure and not insure, underwriting, is really the conditions for what can and can't happen in a market economy. And when you think about those two levers, investment and underwriting, they're working very hard against us currently to do the things that we want to do. But if they're harnessed, can be an incredible force to be a tailwind behind the work that needs to get done. At the same time, insurance is breaking. If any of you have lived in California, the Mountain West, the Southeast, the Midwest, the Northeast, most parts of the United States, the gap between risk and coverage is accelerating. What we're seeing is more and more risk enter the market. And as a result, there is more and more catastrophe losses, and a lot of those are going uninsured. And essentially, insurance has always been looked at from an actuarial or historical perspective. And we are fast moving into a very unpredictable future where those historical models no longer can match the acceleration of risk entering the market. And ultimately, insurance is all about spreading around risk. And right now, there's not many more places to spread it. And so you're starting to see the very conditions of the insurance industry break down. And as Gunther had alluded to in that previous slide, when things become uninsurable, they become harder to operate. And from the housing markets to credits to banking, things start to break down really, really quickly. And that gap is also creating a massive operating crisis for businesses. Typically, and this is not always, but insurance is the third to fifth largest expense for a business and rising every year, but it's also the leading condition for operating. Without property coverage, as an example, you can't secure financing. Without directors and officers insurance, you can't recruit board members. And without liability, a lot of contracts or just general business operations start to break down. And what we're seeing is for a lot of industries that have high exposure from a geography perspective or from an industry perspective, or have complex global supply chains that are exposed to risk, it's really becoming harder and harder to operate, either because the costs to insure are becoming too high, or they're struggling to find insurance at all. And uniquely, we all face this challenge together, which is a really amazing opportunity to come together. And when you think about people buying insurance, from us as individuals to a mom and pop business to the Salesforces of the world, everyone right now is saying, man, I feel like I'm paying too much, and it's also really hard to find the coverage I need. That is a shared problem that is being solved very disparately. And when we continue to approach it in an isolated manner, we pay the rates that are set for us. We have no leverage. We're ultimately invisible to carriers, and when we want to influence them on how they underwrite and how they make investment decisions, if you're spending $100 a year on insurance in a $7 trillion market, you are really a drop in the bucket from an influence perspective. That being said, insurance uniquely also has the ability to organize through a role called the brokerage. And what we've seen in the industry for different circumstances is that organized buyers really win. They're able to concentrate volume, meaning they can go from an individual buyer spending $100 to a collection of 1,000 representing 1,000,000, creating much more leverage in the market. You can better share data, and from there you can better capture carrier attention and bring them to the table on better terms and more influence. And ultimately, what we exist to do is to create the market conditions that use organized demand to get carriers to compete for the book that we're building based on sustainable principles. And I'll explain that a little bit further in the deck, but really, when you think about what we need to do both as a society here in the United States, but also when it comes to a lot of these climate challenges, is come back together and use a shared voice to create leverage to see the change that we want in the world. And so when you think about the industry today, there is a number of needs and wants from everyone. Carriers need stable, organized premium volume. Businesses want competitive values aligned programs, and communities ultimately want to stabilize pricing and find new ways to fund the adaptation and mitigation work that is needed. And it creates this Venn diagram of needs, but there's really no solution or group advocating for those to align those interests. And Premiums for the Planet exists to be that infrastructure. We looked at the insurance value chain where there's MIT who buys insurance, there's a broker in the middle who helps them facilitate that purchase, and then the carrier is the one providing the coverage. We are smack dab in the middle, not because I ever literally wanted to work in insurance, but because we saw it as a really amazing way to organize and build influence in the market using a mechanism that everyone knows and uses every day. And so in using that brokerage role, we are able to create a coordinated demand platform that helps us concentrate premium, standardized data. And what we're actively doing is using that to create market leverage that turns all of these fragmented buyers, businesses, into an organized market force. And we're trying to be really intentional about where we start. It's a $7 trillion industry. When we first started, it was like me and Brad in a truck. And so you can't essentially, go and just start knocking on carriers' doors and saying, hey, like, do this for us. What you really need to do is bring the business case and the market value to create change. It's just the way it works in a modern economy. And as much as you can use advocacy or things like that, what really moves the needle is market demand and really showing the groups that you want to change that there's demand there for the change that you want to see. And so as an example, about 40% of our members are B Corps. If you're not familiar with the B Corp, it's essentially a certification process you go through to prove that you're a better steward of people and planet. We are a B Corp ourselves. We're actually the only US commercial B Corp brokerage in the United States. And we are using our platform to organize B Corps into a market force that can start to reward them economically for the effort that they put forth to become a certified B Corp. And the reason we're doing that is right now, there's no economic link to being a better steward of people and planet in most cases. And we fundamentally believe that the organizations that go through that much detail and documentation are a better than average risk for the market. And what's really amazing about B Corps is they all have shared data infrastructure. There's over 200 standardized governance indicators in the B Impact Assessment, and it really provides public, accurate, and verified data that the insurance market can actually look at and react to. And at the same time, B Corps are more resilient. In a lot of research, it's shown that through trouble, whether it's COVID, economic downturn, they have a higher survival rate and are ultimately more effective at managing through crisis. And so when you look at different pockets of the United States, whether it's mountain towns that are really struggling to get insurance, B Corps that aren't being rewarded for the effort they're putting forward, so on and so forth, there's a number of different groups that are ready and the infrastructure is there. We really just have to activate it much better. And I talked about compound interest earlier. This is not an overnight dopamine hit impact story. Like we are not going to businesses and saying, hey, join Premiums for the Planet and we're going to be able to reduce your footprint overnight. What we're saying is come together, join us, and ultimately through organization, we can all vote with our dollars for a better future. And so currently we're doing really well. We have 100 plus major organizations on board. We're aggregating premiums under management. We're standardizing the data. But we really have a vision where we can take this and create a blueprint for different verticals, for different business groups, and really show folks that there is a way to come together to advocate with your dollars and create a change in a much needed way for an industry that has lost its way, for a lack of better words. And pausing there, I just wanted to kind of stop, Jennifer. It's a lot of insurance. That was just like kind of tossed at people. And so often I find it's helpful to, yeah, clarify terminology, clarify how we work and how we operate, and also just get a sense from people what they think and any questions they have. Would love to pause there.
Great. Oh yeah, we have one.
Yeah, you put a big emphasis on the data collection piece. I'm curious to hear why that's important.
Yeah, great question. As much as you want to say like, hey, as a B Corp, we are lower risk, you really need to show that from the data side to a carrier. And there's ways to do that. There's documentation that is baked into the B impact assessment that shows how rigorous you are when looking at your supply chain, your products, your executive team, and there's ways to convey that to the market. But there's also things just in your historical insurance profile, such as loss ratios or things that are just markers of better risk. And I think, like anything in the business world, if you're able to tell the story with data, it really, really helps. A lot of what we talk about often feels like it's more advocacy work or kind of rah, but when you can really tie data to that, you help people see through the numbers that there's truth behind what you're saying. And we found that that's really the critical link in insurance is they are very, very data first. Like when you think about how they set risk and how they set pricing, it all comes from a data backed approach. And so really trying to understand what motivates and aligns with their interests and provide that as part of those conversations.
Okay. Sounds like really puts proof to the leverage piece that you're focused on.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions? All right. Take it back to you, Nick.
Amazing. And so I think like a big thing that I've picked up on, at least in my own journey, is that it feels like you need to be like at the biggest company with the most resources doing the most important work. And I think right now there's a lot of misalignment in incentives. Right now, I have interpreted and experienced that the system typically rewards a lot of things that are individualized, whether that's optimizing the individual footprint of an organization, publishing dashboards, making pledges, or impact reports that talk a lot about the great work that is happening at an organization. And it is really important work, don't get me wrong, but often that operates within the organizational boundaries and a really tight narrative of what climate impact is. And I think we've gone really narrow in thinking about it in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions from an individual organization's footprint. And I really believe that the planet needs more people that understand systems, where leverage to pull levers in those systems is, people that can make things that are opaque and hyper objects like insurance, like climate change, more tangible and really felt in the experience of the day-to-day life of most people. And ultimately, people that can build better trust coordination. Last year or a few years ago, when the administration turned over, I was shocked to see how low climate was on the priority list from a voting perspective. And when you think about why that is, there's a lot of things in front of climate that really matter to a lot of people. And one of the projects that I work on outside of Premiers to the Planet is the US Chamber of Connection, where we're really looking to understand the loneliness epidemic in the United States and how that underpins anxiety and depression. And the reason I became involved in that work is I really started to understand that as a country that is very fractured, with a lot of folks that are struggling on a day-to-day basis just with self-management, if you can't start there and identify the root problem, then you're never going to be able to get people to care about things that are as far off, lack of tangibility as climate. And so the reason I bring that up is everything is ultimately interconnected. There is no job or role that can't be tied back to climate work. If you think about Jennifer and her role, even, she has done an amazing job of getting more people into the workforce to work on climate. Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not working on a carbon accounting report every day,
Correct.
but you're really
No.
taking what you do best, which is career development, applying it to a cause you care a lot about, and moving forward from there. And so I haven't looked at the job market recently, personally, just based on what I'm doing, but I can imagine it's really hard and really difficult and that the requirements are getting tighter. And so if you feel stuck on thinking about how do I get into this very specific role at an organization with a small climate team, I'd challenge you to think outside the box. And again, going back to what I started with is really thinking about what are you uniquely positioned to do, apply it to something you care a lot about, and then find a way to bring that work into an impact focus that matters, whether it's climate, whether it's healthcare, whether it's homelessness, it all ultimately ladders up to solving shared challenges. And a lot of amazing people in my network have figured out a way to do that without working directly on an impact report every year. And so I always kind of like to leave different actions that people can take. I find that first, it's important to get really, really clear on where your leverage is. You have one of the best career services departments in the world. You might have the best career services department in the world, and really work with them. Take advantage of it. It was the one thing that I can look back on in college that I did get right was working as closely as I could with folks like Susan Brennan, and it changed my life. And I think that it's those opportunities that are part of your education that can't be overlooked and are more important than any test you will take, or really like even any random internship you might take. Just getting to know yourself, getting to know where your own unique leverage is really, really critical. Second, if you're feeling stuck from an application process or not really sure where to start or where to go, just sit down and think about first things that really interest you, and then go find a list of people that are working on those things. From there, work with your career services department on how to best reach out and open that door, but always start by offering to help before you ask for anything. And so this week, if you can even write down 10 names and send 3 emails, that is the compound interest that allows you to start making progress week over week to having a really unique and differentiated career. And then it's way more fun to do stuff together. I personally work in this little apartment every day and just like shout at my screen and do the thing. And it would be way more fun to be able to collaborate with my business partner, Brad, who lives in Aspen. And the reality is we can't bridge that gap, but you're in a very unique situation where you're surrounded by a ton of very smart people every day who also really want to make the world a better place. So find someone who shares a passion with you, set up a coffee, and just have a fun brainstorm, because those are the moments that are rare and rare to find in today's world. And so take advantage of the fact that you can be in person, be in community, and go build something together. And we also need a lot of help at Premiums of the Planet. So if you are particularly skilled at any of the things on the right, I'd encourage you to reach out. We're in a really unique period of looking to build some new projects this year. And so I'm always happy to be a voice to see if there's a role for you here to help you through my network, which I think has been built up in a great way over the last few years. And then also, if you're just feeling stuck, as mentioned, I've kind of been through the ringer a handful of times in my own career. So just happy to shed more advice, make that connection, or again, see if there's something for you here with us. And so with that, Jennifer, I wanted to leave at least 15 to 20 minutes to do some Q&A, but we'll pause there and hear from folks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nick. Okay, let's open it up. I mean, Nick has raised his hand to be a resource, especially for those who are trying to navigate the climate career path. So let's take advantage. What questions do you guys have? I have a quick one. I can kick things off. Okay, if I'm a student who's really struggling to think about or to get an interview in the corporate sustainability space, what advice would you give?
Yeah, just to make sure I had it cut out a little bit. The question was, if you're a student struggling to get an interview in the corporate space, what advice would you have?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. I think just speaking from experience, I've always struggled to get interviews. I didn't have great grades in college, and I just wasn't someone who always stood out on paper. And so I think I would go back to my advice of, again, finding people that you feel are interesting and reaching out to them in an authentic way and asking to support first. A few of the ways that I've gotten interviews in the past, and even my first job at Salesforce, was I reached out to a sales leader there and asked them for something that they needed help with. They needed help on thinking through how to recruit better to students on the East Coast. I happened to be a student on the East Coast. I got on a phone call, chatted with them a few times, and then a month later, when a role opened up, they thought of me and reached out. And so I would just encourage you to figure out ways to lead with service by going after the groups that or people that you're most interested with. And typically, when you go first, when you lead with support, the world will work out in a funny way to help you out down the line.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to have one more. Okay, if I were a student sitting in this room today, what would you recommend I focus on over the next 12 months?
I would really try to get clear on signs you have noticed along your own journey. I think there's a lot of signals out there that really help attune you to what you are passionate about, what you are really good at. And there's a lot of pressure externally to ignore those signals. I personally was in a very competitive business school at Bentley University where it made a lot of sense to go work at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or one of these larger organizations. And I just knew deep down that one, I would not enjoy that, but also I would probably never get one of those jobs. And so it was really through thinking through what do I actually like? What am I passionate about? And what are things I want to apply that to that helped me get clear on the path that I needed to go to. When I went to Salesforce on the West Coast, I was one of only a few students at Bentley that year that moved outside of really the Eastern region. And so it was a huge risk, at least it felt like at the time, to leave my community behind and leave what felt like a much safer path behind. But by really trying to be attuned to that internal track that I had noticed, it has now opened up an incredible life in many ways for me, but also an incredible career. And so over the next 12 months, I would definitely start by focusing on introspection and noticing your path to where you are today and what are some common themes that really light you up and that you feel you've been really met with a lot of energy for the skills you can provide, and then work with Jennifer, Susan, and the amazing team to really figure out where those can be applied and try to tune out the noise as much as possible. I can imagine at MIT, people have a lot of really cool experiences, backgrounds, and all these different things. And that's amazing. Like, cheer for them, root for them, but just know that you have to kind of put blinders on and do what is best for you. And that can be super, super hard. But ultimately, if you take steps towards what you feel is most authentic for yourself, it will feel right and it'll give you the confidence to continue to follow that. And you will also know when you're off path, and that's okay too. It happens, but the more you can be attuned to what is right, it's helpful to course correct along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we have a question.
Hi, Nick. I have a quick question, maybe less so related to career trajectory and more so about premiums for the planet. What are the specific climate positive initiatives that your premiums support? For context, I'm thinking a lot about scaling the voluntary carbon market from a financial perspective, and insurance markets play a huge role in providing the financial capital necessary to do so. So are the climate positive initiatives that you guys invest in, is this like carbon dioxide removal companies or projects similar to this, or what does that capacity look like?
Yeah, amazing question. So to peek under the hood a little bit, like the way that we operate is in the brokerage role. And typically in insurance, when you pay a premium as a business, industry standard, about 90% of that goes to the carrier. And then a broker earns like 10% commission on average. And we have a wide network of other brokers that we partner with. And we've negotiated a split of that standard commission to resource our work, but also to drive that capital into different initiatives. And so as a B Corp, as a 1% for the Planet member, Conservation Alliance member, Protect Our Winters member, all these different kind of cause partners we're associated with, a decent amount of our revenue just goes directly back into causes that we support. And so the way that we think about that for a business and how we communicate it is just by joining, for no extra cost, you can add mission alignment and brand value to those dollars and also unlock additive philanthropy. So just in joining, businesses are able to redirect existing insurance spend into causes that we've sort of laid out as ones that we feel particularly impactful. The second phase is really around how we use aggregated demand to drive different outcomes. And so we aren't often shifting folks from carrier A to carrier B when they join. What we're doing instead is building aggregation to figure out where we have market-based influence. And so two specific projects that we're working on right now are where we feel there's really interesting opportunities to explore. One is in the what I would call mission-driven business community. So I gave the B Lab example of trying to link better management of an organization around environmental and social and people principles to economic outcomes in the market. And that is very like insurancy and focused on like how do we basically prove business value and reduce costs for businesses doing the right thing. The other is what I would call like geographic based problems. We work broadly across a number of different mountain towns right now. We have a pilot with Park City where we're looking at what is a shared problem of wildfire risk, where even though Park City has a ton of resources, a ton of visibility, and a ton of truly like amazing work going on, they can't avoid the fact that they're in the smack dab middle of a dark red fire zone from a risk perspective. And so all of those buyers are handling that problem disparately. And we're trying to figure out how we can not just organize them to bring carriers back to the table and keep that region insured, but also through our brokerage model, earmark a percentage of the dollars that flow to premiums to the planet to go into a resilience fund held locally that can distribute those dollars for adaptation and mitigation efforts. And so in summary, often what we're working towards is more how do we aggregate demand to create new innovative products in the market that wouldn't exist without that? And then also, how can we take existing capital that exists in the insurance flow and immediately direct that to projects that need it? Downstream, as like the third act, once we have what would be appropriate scale, we really would want to start to hope that we can influence carriers to build what we would say is like fossil free or carbon intensive free products, where we're ultimately moving capital away from industry laggards to industry leaders and really trying to show that there is a market for sustainability and get carriers to compete on it. The carrier market in the United States is very far away from that today. The EU and UK is leading a bit more. And we feel that the only way to accelerate it here, especially with the current political situation around climate, is to use market-based demand to get us there.
Yeah, we have one online.
We have a question on Zoom. It's a two-part question. What statistical evidence do carriers require to incorporate governance indicators into actuarial models? And are there pilot data sets proving predictive power beyond historical loss curves?
Yeah, great question. The first way I would look at that is, am I still there? It just froze for a second, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the first way I would look at that is even before you get to data, you need volume. And so industry standard in insurance, like you need to have X amount of premiums under management to be able to open that conversation. Like when Brad and I first started, my business partner, again, we couldn't just go to a large carrier and say, hey, give us this. They'd be like, where's the demand for it? Is anyone asking for this? And so there are certain premium under management thresholds that allow you to drive certain innovation, just table stakes before you get into the data side of things. And then second, what they're really looking for is like data that can help them understand the profile of a group of buyers so that they can make essentially underwriting decisions for a collective, when historically it's done in a very technical sense for the individual. And some examples of where that exists today is like you'll see AARP or AAA, where it's almost like a affinity group or membership-based organization, where by joining it, you're essentially aligning yourself to that profile or that affinity. And then a carrier can come in and build bespoke products for that. It also exists for credit unions in some cases. There's energy groups that use this. And so it's a very common model in insurance. And we're just trying to use it for mission-driven organizations or areas of the country that have very acute shared climate risk. And so you don't need much differentiated data. It's not that complex. What you just really need to do is have the volume and be able to present that data cohesively as this is the profile of the buyer and here's what they're doing to ultimately mitigate or lower their risk. And that's hard. It takes a lot of coordination, and that's what we exist to do. But it isn't rocket science. Like I'm not, again, like someone who's come from a deep like insurance background or any of those things. It really just comes to energy and coordination.
All right, one more question, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, as your business inevitably takes off, and I'm sure it will, like how do you deal with competing brokerages that try to follow what you're doing, who has bigger volumes and bigger influence in the market? And based on your like understanding of that market, like is there something structural that prevents them from doing what you're doing?
I would say we would love for folks to do what we're doing. Like ultimately what we're trying to do is to create the incentives in the market and how ultimately the insurance industry does business. We are, as mentioned, like the only B Corp US broker in the United States. We've held that designation for a number of years and folks haven't come in to kind of compete in that space. And I guess in the true traditional sense, like that is a competitive advantage for us. It's hard to become a B Corp organization. But broadly speaking, when you think about larger brokers, we actually think about them as partners. They can be really great allies in this work. And if they started to ultimately copy what we're doing, that means what we're doing is working. And what we really would like to see is that all players and stakeholders within the insurance market see sustainability as a competitive advantage. It's a huge market. It's the second largest, the insurance is the second largest asset manager on the planet behind banks. As mentioned, we spend like $7 trillion a year on insurance. So there's a lot to go around. And so even if we are a small piece of that pie, but the industry moves in a much better direction, then ultimately our business has been a success. And so I think like right now, I would actually invite more folks to kind of come into this space and continue to do this work. There's more than enough to go around, and it would be a great way to move the industry forward faster.
Well, I want to be mindful of time. I saw one more hand go up. So Nick, can I invite you, can students reach out to you directly if they have follow-up questions?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, like my presentation was just about reaching out, and like the only
Amazing.
thing that's happened in
Amazing.
my career is by reaching out. So please do it.
Amazing. We'll share follow-up notes to everybody who signed up. We'll share maybe your email and LinkedIn, if that's okay.
Yeah, and then I will send you that article by Gunther. It's a very short article, but it's one of the most concise kind of representations of the reality of where we stand today. And so I think it's a very sobering article, but it also, I think, is really clarifying at the same time. So I'll share that as well.
Amazing. That'd be great. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully this will be the first of many interactions with Sloanies. But please join me in thanking Nick for being our guest speaker.
Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate it.